The kingdom of Darnath used to be a place of legend, a realm of gold and magic nestled between the Black Mountains and the Ash Deserts. But now it was dying. The crops failed, the rivers ran dry, and the king's court grew ever more desperate. And on top of that, they had a king who hadn't aged in 60 years. King Valor the Eternal, they called him, though he looked more like King Valor the Unliving. He ruled with wisdom, and few would question his rule. But everyone in the kingdom whispered tales of him in the shadows of the temples. Some said he'd made a pact with the gods long ago to save his people from a great plague, sacrificing his own mortality in exchange for their continued existence. Others claimed his blood was no longer human, that he dipped into some dark and forbidden magic to cheat death itself. Whatever the truth, the king kept to his throne room day and night, rarely leaving it for anything or anyone, draped in golden robes and seated atop a silver chair carved from meteorite stone. His face was pale, his veins dark like ink beneath his skin. And no one saw him eat or sleep. Only his most trusted advisor, High Magister Thalor, was allowed into the throne chamber during the dead of night when strange sounds echoed through the palace, wet, dragging sounds, like something melting. And one night, a young palace scribe named Elian dared to press his ear to the stone wall near the throne room, trying to make out what was happening within. And he heard a voice whisper from within the room. He is not alive, and yet he breathes. He is not dead, and yet he rots. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time. And now, Chapter 4. The next morning, Elian was gone. His chambers were found soaked in a black tar-like substance, and his scrolls had melted into puddles of ink. The palace guards whispered of a rotting stench that followed them wherever they patrolled. Queen Lysandra, once a powerful sorceress from the Northern Isles, confronted the king in fury. "You have hidden the truth for too long," she shouted before the court. "You wear a cursed crown, one that drinks the life of all who rule with it." The king's voice, slow and syrupy, filled the chamber. "This throne is my prison and my sustenance. Step too close and you will see what it feeds on." Before her eyes, the veins on his face pulsed and a dark fluid leaked from his mouth. His fingertips had begun to stick to the metal of the throne, as if fusing with it. The queen fled the kingdom that very night, riding south towards the city of Brass, where legend said an antidote to curses could be bought. But the road was long, and the sun beat down on her as she rode. And so Lysandra stopped at a small inn for some rest, only to find her nightmares following her even there. For when she awoke, she saw that her bags were soaked in that same black ichor that had filled Elias's chambers. The innkeeper, a plump woman with shrewd eyes, examined the queen's bags with a knowing smile. "Ah, so you bring me a king's ransom, and not a copper to your name. How the mighty have fallen." She turned to the queen, her smile turning cruel. "But perhaps I can help you. Perhaps there's an antidote to your little problem. For a price, of course." The queen drew her sword. "Tell me where the nearest smithy is, and I will buy you a new roof with the first coin I earn." The innkeeper threw back her head and laughed. "You misunderstand, my dear. I don't want your money. I want the cursed thing itself. Bring me the crown, queen, and I'll cure you for free." Lysandra hesitated. This innkeeper was clearly no mage, but something in her eyes told the queen she was no commoner either. What was she then? And how did she know about the curse? These questions burned in Lysandra's mind as she rode toward the setting sun. She knew that innkeeper would not harm her, at least not yet. So she took the time to plan her next move. The crown was heavy in her pack, a physical manifestation of the burden of lies and secrets the king had forced upon her. It pressed against her spine, seeping into her flesh like a brand. Even from this distance, she could feel its power corrupting her, twisting her thoughts and warping her vision. The crown wanted her to forget everything she had sworn to protect, to cast aside her principles in favor of preserving the illusion. She thought of Elias, his vacant eyes staring sightlessly into the middle distance. Had he known about the curse? Why had he come to her with the crown if he knew it was a death sentence? Was this part of his plan, a way to frame the king and cast suspicion on his counselors? Or had Elias been as rash as she was, acting on a hunch without thinking of the consequences? No, he wouldn't have done that. He wasn't that kind of man. Then what had happened to him? Had the crown taken him, made him one of its mindless thralls? Or had it simply rejected him when it sensed her approaching? So many questions with so few answers. As darkness fell, she came to a small clearing. The trees here were ancient, their branches gnarled and twisted like the limbs of some enormous beast. The very air hung heavy with magic, wild and untamed. Perfect. This was just what she needed. A place to hide while she figured out her next move. Suddenly, the trees shimmered and coalesced, forming a humanoid shape wreathed in thorny vines. It moved toward her, taking on a more solid form as it approached. A dryad, one of the oldest and wisest creatures in the forest. If anyone could help her, it would be the dryad. Kneeling before the tree, Lysandra poured out her tale, ending with a sob. "What am I to do, wise one? How can I break this curse?" The tree rustled, its voice like the wind through dead leaves. "The antidote to a curse is knowledge, child. But knowledge is a double-edged sword. Are you sure you want to wield it?" And with that, the dryad vanished, leaving the queen alone in the darkness with only the whispers of the trees for company. Now, normally, when you hear a noise in the woods, you assume it's a wild animal or maybe just the wind. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's something else entirely. Something that's hungry. Something that's watching, waiting for you to let your guard down so it can strike. And with that terrifying thought in mind, our story continues. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. As months passed, the king became less a man and more a melting creature, his body slowly sinking into the throne. His limbs stiffened, his chest stopped rising and falling, yet his eyes remained open, burning with a hunger no food could satisfy. The royal court abandoned the palace, leaving only Thalor, the magister, who continued to tend to the melting corpse that still issued commands. One day, the king's voice came from the walls, the floors, and sometimes even through other people's mouths. The king's council, desperate for a solution, turned to the ancient texts, seeking a way to break the curse that had transformed their beloved monarch into a horrifying, shambling husk. Finally, an obscure passage caught their attention. It spoke of a hero who, in the face of impossible odds, had vanquished the devourer of souls, a creature of immense power and insatiable hunger, a being so terrifying it had been banished to the void between realms. The text spoke of a ritual, a dangerous and forbidden magic that could banish the devourer back to the void from whence it came. But the cost was immense. The hero would have to confront the devourer directly, and in doing so, risk becoming one with the very darkness they sought to contain. Still, hope flickered in the hearts of the council. If anyone could face this terrible entity, it was Sir Rendell, the bravest knight in the kingdom, a warrior whose valor and unwavering spirit were the stuff of legends. Rendell, clad in shining armor, his sword at the ready, ventured forth into the desolate landscape. As he journeyed, the ground beneath his feet grew colder, the sky above him darker, as if the very world itself was recoiling in fear. Finally, he stood before the palace gates, now rusted and crumbling, a stark reminder of the once great kingdom that lay in ruins within. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the gates and stepped inside. He found the throne room, now filled with a thick black ooze that seemed to writhe and pulse like a living thing. And there, atop the throne, was King Valor, or what remained of him. The king's body was half liquid, his spine visible through translucent skin oozing onto the throne. But even in this state, his eyes burned with an unholy light, and his voice, though distorted and raspy, still carried the regal cadence that had once commanded respect and admiration. "So, you have come to join me in my eternal hunger," the king rasped, his voice echoing strangely within the vast chamber. "You cannot hope to defeat me, mortal. I am the devourer of souls, and all shall be mine." Rendal, his face grim, raised his sword. "Your reign of terror ends here, monster!" he shouted, his voice echoing with determination. With a sudden fluid movement, the king launched himself off the throne, or what was left of it. Tendrils of black ooze lashed out at Rendal, seeking to bind and consume him. But the knight was ready. With a battle cry, he slashed and parried, his blade singing through the air as he fought to keep the creature at bay. The battle raged, not just between a knight and a monster, but between the forces of light and the encroaching darkness. Yet as the fight wore on, Rendal began to falter. The ooze, slick and tenacious, proved a difficult opponent. And with each passing moment, the devourer grew stronger, drawing power from the despair and fear that oozed from the ruined kingdom. Seeing his opening, the devourer lunged. One final desperate cry escaped Rendal's lips as the black ooze enveloped him, seeking to consume his very soul. And then, silence. The devourer, having consumed its prey, let out a triumphant roar that shook the very foundations of the palace. But its victory was short-lived, for in the depths of the earth, something stirred, a slumbering power that had lain dormant for centuries. Sensing the disturbance, a spectral figure emerged, its form shimmering with otherworldly light. It was the last of the ethereals, an ancient race of beings who had sealed away the devourer in days long past. With a voice that echoed with the wisdom of ages, the Eternal called upon the powers of light, banishing the devourer back to the void from whence it came. As the devourer was cast out, the spectral figure turned to the throne, now empty. Its task complete, the ethereal faded, leaving behind a final message for the people of the kingdom. The darkness is vanquished, but its return was hastened by your own despair. Only when you learn to face your fears and embrace hope can the wound in this world truly be healed. Years passed. The kingdom fell to ruin. Vines crawled up the palace walls. The people of Darnath spoke of the living corpse king, whose throne had grown teeth, eyes, and roots that spread underground like cancer. One day, a group of children entered the palace on a dare. In the dark, crumbling throne room, they found a puddle of black sludge beneath the throne. And sitting upon it was no longer a man, but a shape, a wet, bubbling, half-conscious mound, crowned with gold. The children ran, but one of them, the youngest, stayed. She walked slowly toward the throne and whispered, "What are you?" A dozen mouths opened from the mound. They replied in unison, "I am a king who feared death, and now I am worse." The girl fled, but behind her, the throne creaked. Slowly. It moved for the first time in centuries. They say it is still moving, and every year it gets closer, closer to the edge of the palace, closer to the town, closer to the people, because the throne is hungry, and kings must feed. This is a story from our collection, Grim Tales from the Kingdom of Darnath. Now, before I begin, I should warn you that these stories are not for the faint of heart. They are dark and disturbing, filled with monsters and magic, and the kind of evil that lingers in your dreams long after you have woken. So if you are easily frightened, then do not listen when the moon is full and the wind is high, for that is when the shadows grow longest and the monsters come alive. Now then, are you still with me? Good. Let us begin. Once upon a time, in a far-off kingdom, there lived a king who was beloved by his people. He was just and fair, brave and true, and all of Darnath prospered under his rule. But the king had a secret, a terrible secret that he kept hidden from everyone. even his wife and children, for the king was afraid of dying. He feared the grave as a hungry beast, and the thought of his own mortality haunted him like a ghost. So he sought out the darkest and most evil of magic, and it was strong enough to raise the dead, to twist and warp the very essence of life. With this magic, he made a bargain with a creature beyond our understanding, something that dwelt in the furthest reaches of the underworld, where souls go to be judged. The king gave it his word that if it granted him immortality, he would give it his kingdom, his crown, and his very life force. And so the king became immortal. But at what cost? The years turned into centuries, and the once proud and handsome monarch wasted away into a desiccated husk, his skin like parchment, his eyes like chips of ice. Yet he did not die. And as the years dragged on, his obsession with remaining alive grew stronger and stronger until finally he dedicated his entire being to it. His flesh withered and dried until it clung to his bones in tatters. Then his bones themselves turned to dust and fell apart, leaving behind only a mound of decaying flesh, a throne of teeth and eyes, a crown of thorns and roots. That was the last the people of Darnath saw of their king, or so they thought, for he had become one with his throne, a grotesque parody of the man he once was. And so the palace was abandoned, left to crumble into ruin as the centuries rolled by. And the people of Darnath rebuilt their lives in the shadow of the ruined palace walls. They told stories of the king around campfires, tales designed to scare children into good behavior, for it was said that if you angered the king, he might rise from his throne and choose you as his next victim. Some dismissed these stories as mere fairy tales, but others believed them to be true and lived in fear of the day the king might return. And then one day, a group of children dared each other to enter the forbidden palace and see the king for themselves. They snuck past the crumbling walls and broken gates and crept into the throne room. There, in the dim torchlight, they saw the throne of teeth and eyes and the pile of rotting flesh at its base. Suddenly, one of the children slipped and fell, knocking over a nearby bucket. Black sludge oozed from beneath the throne, dripping onto the floor and pooling at the children's feet. They screamed and ran, tripping over one another as they fled the room. But one of them, the youngest, stayed. She stood frozen to the spot, staring at the throne in awe and terror. Slowly, she began to walk forward, drawn by some unseen force. As she approached the throne, more black sludge poured out from beneath it, coalescing into a shapeless blob crowned with the golden circlet. The blob twitched and pulsed, and the girl could have sworn she saw a pair of eyes open within the mass of flesh. Then a dozen mouths opened from the mound, and in unison they whispered, "What do you seek?" The girl gasped and stumbled back, but she couldn't bring herself to flee, and so the throne moved. Slowly, it rose from its slumber. Inch by inch, it creaked and groaned, revealing the monstrous king in all his glory or perhaps his shame. And the girl stood transfixed, unable to move or speak. And so I end my tale. For what happened next, we can only guess. Some say the throne claimed the girl as its new vessel, and every year it rises a little higher, a little stronger, waiting for the day it can finally break free of the palace walls and claim the kingdom that is rightfully its own. Others say the girl escaped, and the throne collapsed back into its pit, defeated and enraged, to wait for another foolish soul to anger it once more. But I believe neither of those endings. For having seen the king, even from afar, the girl knew one undeniable truth. Kings must feed. And whatever dark magic bound the king to his throne, it required a constant source of power to maintain itself. So every year the throne grows hungrier, and every year it claims another victim, bringing it ever closer to the edge of the palace walls, closer to the town, closer to the people. For the throne is hungry, and kings must feed. Now, if you survived the reading of this tale, then I commend you. For the stories of Darnath are not for the faint of heart, and the king's hunger is never satiated. But if you have survived this story and you wish to hear more, then perhaps you have what it takes to endure the horrors that await. For there are more tales to tell, more monsters to unveil. Do you dare continue listening? If you do, then beware. For the deeper we delve into the lore of Darnath, the darker it becomes. Are you sure you want to continue? Well then, let us venture forth into the shadows and uncover more grim tales from the kingdom of Darnath.